Stanley Kubrick is a very polarizing director in many aspects. His style is so recognizably him that it's earned the name Kubrickian. Has it, or did I just make that word up? I don't know. The stories of working with him are legendary. He treated his actors like garbage. He made Scatman Crothers shoot his death scene in The Shining like 100 times, and Scatman Crothers had a mental breakdown. When I look at Stanley Kubrick, the first thing that comes to mind is that he's truly a filmmaker's filmmaker, as for years many filmmakers have modeled their work off of his work. Stanley Kubrick legitimately tried to make a movie in every genre possible. He did horror, comedy,
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
epic, science fiction. Oftentimes, Kubrick would find a work of fiction like a book that was somewhat obscure and turn it into a film, and in many instances, his film adaptations became more well-known than the source material. Shortly after Kubrick finished The Shining, he contacted war correspondent Michael Herr to discuss working on a movie about the Holocaust, but this quickly shifted gears to Kubrick wishing to work on a movie about the Vietnam War, particularly based on Herr's war memoir, Dispatches. Michael Herr was a little resistant to this at first, as he really didn't want to have to relive his experiences in Vietnam, but Kubrick proceeded to harass Herr about it for 3 years straight until he finally relented and came aboard the project. During this time, Kubrick also discovered Gustav Hasford's novel The Short-Timers, which was a semi-autobiographical work of fiction. Basically, Hasford took his experiences from Vietnam and kind of fictionalized them and wrote them around characters that he created. Kubrick liked the book enough that he invited Hasford aboard to help develop the film, which would go from being titled The Short-Timers to being titled Full Metal Jacket. The process of Full Metal Jacket's development is very painstaking, as it was an adaptation of The Short-Timers, but it was also drawing a lot of inspiration from Herr's work, Dispatches. Narrative-wise, it would follow The Short-Timers with some creative liberties taken, but Dispatches was there to kind of act as a guide for how the movie would look and feel. The development of this movie between the three parties took place mostly over the phone. It was all indirect correspondence, and Kubrick would write his screenplay, and then the other two contributors would send their work into Kubrick, which would all be included in the final draft of the script. While Kubrick did work directly with Herr, he didn't meet Gustav Hasford until after early pre-production. Apparently they didn't get along, and he was not invited back to work on the movie. Full Metal Jacket was shot in the UK and was released in the summer of 1987 and ended up being the second to last film that Stanley Kubrick directed. It was a very successful movie. It made about $120 million versus its $15 to $30 million budget, and it truly is a genre-defining movie, which is very impressive because the movie covers two distinct genres. It's split into two halves, this movie, with the first half covering the whole boot camp movie genre, which was a somewhat popular setting at this point in time. There were a lot of boot camp movies that were comedies or at least light-hearted war dramas, and definitely approached it a lot lighter than this movie would.
Hi, Joker.
Full Metal Jacket would play the boot camp thing completely straight, and because of that, we started getting a lot less boot camp movies because the joke wasn't funny anymore. Going into the second half of the movie, it's your standard war movie, a Vietnam War movie to be exact. I wouldn't exactly call the Vietnam War portion of Full Metal Jacket like your standard Vietnam movie. Going into the second half of the movie, it's your standard war movie, a Vietnam War movie to be exact.
I wouldn't exactly call the Vietnam War portion of Full Metal Jacket like your standard Vietnam movie.
For one, narrative-wise, it's more like a series of vignettes depicting events of the war where the story is very loose. It's more so there to just show you what the Vietnam War was like and kind of progress Joker's story, but in its own way it manages to kind of subvert what other Vietnam War movies were doing at the time. It also subverts the Vietnam War genre by actually having the majority of the combat take place in urban combat zones. Whenever I think of a Vietnam War movie, the first thing that comes to mind is just like jungle warfare. There isn't one goddamn jungle warfare scene in this movie, and it's actually better for it because like you've seen a bunch of different Vietnam movies that take place in the jungle. During the 1980s, the Vietnam War movie was extremely popular due to the long-term effects that the Vietnam War had on American culture. War movies in general have been popular since even the silent era, but the Vietnam movie is drastically different from, say, a movie set in World War II. It covers completely different themes of war. Up to this point, American audiences were used to movies depicting the Americans as being heroic for the acts in the Second World War or even the Korean War. But when you really get down to it, there's nothing really heroic about the Vietnam War as a concept. It was essentially America trying to stop the Vietnamese from adopting communism and intervening in what was a civil conflict between the North and the South. It all just boils down to being another pissing contest with the Russians. And it also doesn't help that reports of war crimes were rampant, and the fact that outside of the most patriotic Americans, many looked at the war as unnecessary and considered the Americans to be the aggressors in the conflict. When the soldiers finally came home, there were no parades to be had. It also doesn't help that they fucking lost. The first few Vietnam movies, when you take a look at them, are more or less like those old World War II movies where they play it for heroism, and these came out during the war itself. However, after the war ended and the 70s started coming to a close, filmmakers chose to do the more gritty and realistic representations of the Vietnam War and really make Americans ashamed of their involvement in it. As a result, we may have gotten more fictionalized accounts of the war like The Deer Hunter or Apocalypse Now, but we also got depictions that showed the war for what it was, whether fictional or played mostly straight. I tell you want to watch a fucking Vietnam War movie that's depressing, watch Casualties of War. I can't fucking sit through that one. At the end of the day, the whole thing was just a terrible, ugly affair that destroyed the lives of millions on both sides and probably never needed to happen. You look at the modern day, we don't really revisit the Vietnam War in film anymore. I think we get the point at this point, because it's not like a good-looking war for America. You look at World War II, and most of the time when it's showing the Allies, it depicts the soldiers as pretty much straightforward heroic, with some exceptions. And even World War II movies that depict the Nazis, unless they're full-on the villains, will portray some of them as tragic victims of their country. And of course, when somebody commits a war crime against a German, it's not that bad. It's almost like a victimless crime. When we see the Vietnam War on screen, at best it depicts the American soldiers as morally gray and does not skimp on depicting how reprehensible some of the participants on the American side were. So now that I've set the tone of the Vietnam War and its depictions in the late 70s and 80s in cinema, let's talk about why I chose to talk about Full Metal Jacket today. Full Metal Jacket was a very well-received movie. It still has roots in pop culture to this day.
What is your major malfunction, numbnuts?
What is your major malfunction?
Hey, guy. I'm mastering my joystick.
This is my rifle, this is my gun. This is for fighting, this is for fun.
This is my rifle, this is my gun, this is for fighting, this is for fun.
It's considered to be one of the best Vietnam War movies in American cinema history. I personally think it is the best Vietnam movie ever made, and I think it's all owed to its cast, its director, and the subject matter itself. It's all just a perfect synergy. Stanley Kubrick is a very grim director. The Vietnam War is a very grim subject, and being directed and written by someone from the UK kind of keeps some of that American bias out of it.
Shut up! We did not lose Vietnam. It was a tie.
We get to see the full effect of a very dark point in American history, so naturally all of this comes together, and the cast is stellar. 2 careers were made out of this movie, cast-wise, and I guess you can say a third one was made, but then he did Cutthroat Island, and you don't really see him in things anymore besides Stranger Things. Over the years, however, I have noticed a certain discourse with this movie. It's not that it's offensive, maybe I should have used a better word than discourse, but it's actually quite the opposite, because this movie truly does show war for what it is. The actual discourse from the movie comes comes from the movie itself, and the general discord between the public opinion of both halves of this movie. I know a lot of people that will say this is their favorite war movie, and they absolutely love the boot camp segment, but have little, if anything, to say about the Vietnam War segment. I've met people that full on fucking shut this movie off after the end of the boot camp segment because they really don't like the second half enough to rewatch it. I've always found that kind of unfair. I don't think the Vietnam portion of the movie is particularly of low quality. I just think the boot camp segment is of such high quality that it's a tough act to follow. Both ends are great though, and on a certain level I do understand why the boot camp portion is more approachable by casual viewing audiences, but I do think the Vietnam segment deserves its flowers. Like, if you watched this movie once and then like didn't really like the Vietnam War segment, maybe give it another run because it's all great. Aside from the discourse between the two halves, one of the fascinating aspects of this movie is that while it is a Stanley Kubrick movie, the usual tropes found within Kubrick movies are a lot more subdued and in some cases completely absent. You still look at it and it is undeniably a Kubrick movie, but it's clear that given the subject matter, he felt it better to lay off on the Kubrick tropes just a little bit. Going into the boot camp portion, it almost feels like a comedy at first. And I guess that's partially because like the boot camp thing was used for a lot of comedy movies back in the day and you're predisposed to perceive it that way when you watch this movie. And it doesn't help that Ermey as Gunnery Sergeant Hartman comes in with the most foul-mouthed confrontational method of introducing himself to his recruits, like, of all time.
What have we got here? A fucking comedian, private joker. I admire your honesty. Hell, I like you. You can come over to my house and fuck my sister.
The shit coming out of his mouth is fucking hilarious, but, like, we're laughing at it, but the recruits are not, because they're like, oh shit, this guy's an asshole.
Do I make you nervous? Sir! Sir, what? Are you about to call me an asshole? Sir, no, sir! How tall are you, Private? Sir, 5'9", sir! 5'9", I didn't know they stacked shit that high.
A drill instructor's job is to dress down the new recruits, to break their individuality and rebuild them as capable soldiers, and part of this includes weeding out the rebels, the idiots, and the jokers, which is exactly what he does. The main character in the movie is J.T. Davis, but honestly, I wouldn't have even known that was a character's name if I didn't look it up, because it's not really used a lot in the film. He is labeled as Private Joker by Hartman after he makes a wisecrack during the introduction.
You, John Wayne? Is this me?
Who said that? Who the fuck said that?
I mentioned a lot of basic training includes breaking individuality, but Joker's story shows how the military isn't completely against individuality. While much of the basic training does stem around cutting out the negative aspects of individuality, it also does work to accentuate the pluses, and Joker earns the respect of Hartman from the get-go for making a wisecrack and coming clean about it. And he continues to do so throughout the boot camp segment as he shows that he has figured out how Hartman works before others.
Now you do love the Virgin Mary, don't you? Sir, negative, sir! Private Joker, are you trying to offend me? Sir, negative, sir! Sir, the private believes that any answer he gives will be wrong, and the senior drill instructor will beat him harder if he reverses himself, sir!
And Hartman rewards this intelligence by granting him the role of squad leader and gives him the responsibility of helping Private Leonard Lawrence, aka Private Pyle, get up to speed with the program as he's been having difficulties.
Private Pyle, from now on, Private Joker is your new squad leader, and you will bunk with him. He'll teach you everything. He'll teach you how to pee.
Sir, yes, sir!
I think the problem with the boot camp thing transitioning into the Vietnam half is that Vincent D'Onofrio and Ermey are the show-stealing roles for this film. And that's not to take away from Matthew Modine as Joker, he's good, but these two are the ones that essentially have made a career out of this movie and are the roles most commonly associated with the picture, and they're only present for this half of the movie. Ermey was an actual drill instructor, and he was initially brought on to coach the actor who was supposed to play the drill instructor, which according to what I've researched on various websites was a role that was initially set to go to either Ed Harris or Robert De Niro. I think Ed Harris probably could have pulled it off, but De Niro is just fucking terrible for this, I'm sorry. Listen here, you motherfucker, you. I'm gonna make you a fucking Marine and you're gonna fucking like it, you fucking mutt. Anyway, this bit's a flop. I think what I'm trying to say here is I don't think Robert De Niro would have been any good at this at all. Like, nothing against De Niro, I like De Niro as an actor, but he lacks the bravado to pull off the role of a drill instructor. When I look at Robert De Niro, I don't see a gruff American military man. Like, Ed Harris had the look, and he played officers later on in different movies, so he probably could have done it, but Ermey getting the part was much to the benefit of the film's lasting impression, so it was a good thing Kubrick gave it to him.
Where in the hell are you from anyway, Private? Sir, Texas, sir! Holy dog shit! Texas, only steers and queers come from Texas, Private Cowboy. And you don't much look like a steer to me, so that kind of narrows it down.
To show just how tailor-made Ermey was for this role, in a very rare instance, most of his dialogue is improvised, and Stanley Kubrick didn't like improvisation on his set. Like, he was a man of structure, but Ermey was just so good at going out there and doing his thing that Kubrick gave him an exception. What the boot camp segment serves to depict is how the military, in this case the United States Marine Corps' whole MO, is to strip down your individuality and dehumanize you to build you back up and turn you into their property. Throughout the course of this segment, it shows two sides of this. It shows the more positive side, which is Hartman helping Joker find his more positive traits as a rebel, and it shows the negative side, which is basically Hartman picking on a mentally challenged guy who just can't get with the program, and everything he does just does not work. And while this movie is about Private Joker, and he is the main perspective character in both acts, the first act centers around Private Pyle and his complete failure to adjust to the environment, as well as his abuse from both the instructor and his fellow Marines. Private Pyle shows obvious signs of what was called slowness back in the day. He wasn't exactly mentally challenged, but he's slow, and as Vincent D'Onofrio, the actor, has admitted, he is on the autism spectrum, and one can assume that Private Pyle is as well. They didn't really know what the autism spectrum was in the 60s, or really the 80s when this movie was made for that matter, but the feeling I get from Pyle is that he was from some small town, likely was not good in school, and couldn't find meaningful work, and decided to join up with the Marines, assuming he wasn't drafted. I think the problem is that Private Pyle is just very simple, very dumb, very bumbling, and he bit off more than he can chew when he joined the Marines. The whole boot camp portion of Full Metal Jacket almost feels like a darker subversion to what was commonly seen in cinema at the time with the more comedic boot camp movies, because Pyle does feel like a bumbling comic relief character. The only problem is he's a bumbling comic relief character in a serious movie about the Vietnam War, and so reality occurs a lot more, and while this does start out as pretty funny.
Get up here, fat boy! Quickly, move it out, Pyle, move it out! You climb obstacles like old people fuck, you know that, Private Pyle?
It gets to a point where it just isn't funny anymore. My favorite character to analyze in this movie, the whole thing, is Sergeant Hartman, as he is portrayed as a somewhat antagonistic force for the recruits, namely Joker and Pyle, because they're the perspective characters. I don't see Sergeant Hartman as being like a villain or a bad guy or anything. He's legitimately just doing his job. Like, he's not there to be your friend. He has to be hard on you so that you become an effective Marine. He isn't malicious, he doesn't discriminate, and as I mentioned, he rewards positive traits. Once again, going back to Joker figuring him out, I do like how he is hard on Joker. He's slapping him around trying to get him to change his answer, but when Joker doesn't do it, he rewards him by making him squad leader. The only time Hartman really does seem like an actual, bad guy is when he's bullying Private Pyle, and he picks on him quite a bit, but it's obviously because he's trying to make Pyle get it. The military, especially at this point in time, was not a place for understanding, and Hartman was trying to get through to Pyle the only way he really knew how, which is by humiliating him and making him feel shame for himself. It wasn't really in the spirit of malice, it was more so like he was trying to light a fire under his ass to get him to improve. And yeah, he does kind of single him out really bad. Like, there's this one shot early in the movie where Pyle screws up his drill and Sergeant Hartman makes him follow the unit with his pants down, sucking his thumb. And it's like it's funny at first, but then you're holding on it and it's like, ah, fuck, you start to feel really bad for him. But even when Hartman is berating Pyle for being physically unfit for the obstacle course, it's pretty funny, but it's funny to a point.
Get your fat ass up there, Pyle! Say what the hell is the matter with you anyway? I'll bet you if there was some pussy up there on top of that obstacle, you could get up there.
While Ermey did nail this part, he has mentioned in retrospect he has a few reservations about how the drill instructor was portrayed, specifically praising Oswald's shooting ability, but when you look at it, it sounded less like the character was praising Oswald and more like he was praising the Marine Corps' ability to utilize a rifle. However, many commentators, and Ermey himself has stated that some of the stuff that Sergeant Hartman does in this movie would most likely get him discharged from the military. Drill sergeants aren't really supposed to hit their recruits. They're not supposed to slap them. They're definitely not supposed to choke them or punch them in the stomach. Hell, nowadays they can't even really force you to do push-ups. There's one part in the book where Sergeant Hartman nearly drowns Private Pyle in a toilet, and Arlie Ermey went to Kubrick and said, yeah, if a drill instructor did that, they would be doing jail time. It obviously adds to the dramatic effect of the character's actions, but yeah, no, drill instructors are really not supposed to hit you.
You can push them out of a plane, you can march them off a cliff, you can send them up to die on some godforsaken rock, but for some reason you can't slap them.
I think part of the reason why this movie might come off as a dark comedy when you watch it is just because of how good Arlie Ermey was at improvising all of his lines. In fact, his dialogue was so funny that Kubrick kept laughing during takes, and due to the fact that Kubrick was from the UK and didn't quite understand American slang, there were times where he had to actually stop the take to ask Ermey what certain things meant. Kubrick didn't know what a reach around was.
I bet you're the kind of guy that would fuck a person in the ass and not even have the goddamn common courtesy to give him a reach around. I'll be watching you.
And as you watch this movie, there are portions where it seems like Hartman is starting to ease up on the recruits and he's trying to get down to their level. An example of this is the Eskimo pussy chant.
I don't know, but I've been told. I don't know, but I've been told. Eskimo pussy is mighty cold. Eskimo pussy is mighty cold.
He's trying to show that he is human too, but he has a job and so do the recruits. Like I said, a drill instructor is not there to be your friend, so he does have to be hard on you, but as he said in the opening,
because I am hard, you will not like me, but the more you hate me, the more you will learn. I am hard, but I am fair.
And he perfectly displays that he is tough but fair throughout the whole movie, or at least his part in it. Unfortunately, he's just not built to deal with somebody like Private Pyle. He doesn't know how to approach it, and that's why he just kind of reverts to harsh punishment. He's built to approach a situation in one singular way, and unfortunately that comes back to bite him on the ass later. I can't speak so much for the physical punishment, but all the other punishments that he's doing, they seem harsh, but what he's trying to accomplish is he's trying to make Private Pyle get it through humiliation. Kind of a whole, oh, I bet you won't screw up like that again type thing, but the problem is Private Pyle just continuously screws up. And once again, it's pretty funny until it isn't. And now, because I'm incredibly immature, the comedic aspects of Private Pyle's story fizzles out pretty fast, and it just gets kinda sad. When Joker's promoted to squad leader, he's given the task of trying to help Private Pyle improve, and it does work to some degree. In a typical boot camp movie, this is the portion where Private Pyle manages to buck up and subvert expectations and become a fine soldier, but it doesn't happen that way. Pyle does improve in some aspects, but he also does still keep screwing up, and it all comes crashing down during an inspection when Hartman finds a jelly donut.
Holy Jesus. What is that? What the fuck is that? What is that, Private Pyle?
Sir, jelly donuts, sir!
A jelly donut?
This pushes Hartman to change his entire approach, but not for the better. He decides that punishing Pyle isn't enough, it's not working, so now whenever Private Pyle screws up, the entire company is punished. Which essentially turns everyone, including Joker who was trying to help Private Pyle, against him. He just keeps screwing up, and the Marines just keep eating shit for it, so they decide to do the most logical thing, and that is hold him down in his bunk with a blanket and beat him with a bunch of bars of soap. Try saying that several times fast. Honestly, the blanket party scene is probably like a signature scene of this movie. It's been parodied a few times, and it is a very popular scene. Basically, due to his multiple fuck-ups, the entire company holds Pyle down with a blanket, gags him, and has everyone run some beatings over him with soap and a sock. Even Joker, who was supposed to be a mentor to Pyle, is peer pressured into doing it, and he obviously doesn't want to do it at first, but when he does, he really lays into him with that soap. Also, fun fact, on set, D'Onofrio and Modine were not getting along well because they had very different approaches to acting, and there was a lot of tension between the two that almost turned into a fight. And when Modine got to this scene, yeah, that rhymed, he took the liberty of actually completely laying into him with that soap. It's at this point in the movie that any comedic moments kind of just die. Like, this whole scene is just really kind of dark and sad, like the way it's lit, the little droning score in the background, and the subject matter itself. It's basically just a bunch of people holding down a mentally challenged guy and walloping him with soap. And the way D'Onofrio sells it with the crying and shit is just like, it's uncomfortable to watch.
It was just a bad dream, fat boy. Ow!
My ex-girlfriend actually, like, cried during this scene because she had a cousin who's, like, a big, dumb guy who's, like, mentally challenged, and, like, she said it reminded it of him, and she was just very upset by this. Like, yeah, it's not like a, yeah, they're gonna get him thing. It's actually kind of an upsetting scene to watch. And what happens because of this is just equally upsetting, because we spend the last bit of the boot camp portion following Private Pyle as he is completely snapped. The smile's completely wiped off his face, he seems really withdrawn, and he isn't reacting to anything, and he's constantly doing the Kubrick stare. However, in a twisted kind of way, this does light the fire under his ass. He does prove that he does have some value as a soldier, as he is a good shot with a rifle and actually does start to gain some praise from the drill sergeant. But at this point in the movie, it's just far too late for this character. As Joker says,
I don't think Leonard can hack it anymore. I think Leonard's a Section 8.
And nobody really catches on to this until it's too late, besides Joker, and either it was being ignored or it was because during a war they really don't care and want to get as many bodies out there as possible. But no, Private Pyle was a Section 8. He's done, he's washed, he's cracked. That man cannot be trusted on a battlefield. The climax of the boot camp sequence, a sequence which in and of itself seems like a parody of boot camp movies played horribly dark, shows Pyle's completely degraded mental state. Despite the fact that he has graduated basic training, he's just done. Like, on the last night, he snaps, he grabs hold of a rifle, and has a confrontation with Joker in the washroom, who is on fire watch that night. Joker tries to talk Pyle down, but it really doesn't work. Pyle's just done. Hartman is eventually drawn into this situation and completely fails the speech check here, and it's not really Hartman's fault. He just genuinely was not built to do this kind of situation. Instead of approaching it calmly and with empathy, he's demanding, he's yelling, and then he makes a personal insult at Pyle, which gets him shot.
What is your major malfunction, numbnuts? Didn't Mommy and Daddy show you enough attention when you were a child?
Private Pyle then blows his fucking brains out in what is probably one of the best headshots in cinema history. It's definitely the most graphic. Marijuana kills. Now, in the original book, the drill instructor's last line is to tell Pyle that he's proud of him, as he is satisfied that he was able to make Pyle into a killer, but they don't use that in this movie, and I really don't know how to feel about them leaving that out. I think it would have been powerful in this, but there's also a chance that it would have completely broken the tension of this sequence, and this whole sequence is just really tense. And that's just how the boot camp sequence ends, with Pyle blowing his brains out. Since both segments of this movie are basically two short films that are tied together, I am going to judge them separately, and yeah, the boot camp segment is the more popular segment for a reason. It tells a great story, it's a unique twist on something that was common in the industry for a long time, but because of how well Full Metal Jacket did it, you know, boot camp movies kind of stopped being a thing. Like, off the top of my head, post Full Metal Jacket, the only noteworthy boot camp movies that come to mind are G.I. Jane and Major Payne, but I guess it's a case where it was done so well here that they never had to do it again, because nobody remembers G.I. Jane, and I only remember Major Payne because Bam Bam Bigelow shows up in it. Private Pyle starts out as being the subject of laughter, but the progression of his arc makes him a sympathetic victim of circumstance. I personally don't think somebody like Private Pyle should have ever been allowed in the military in the first place. You even find yourself feeling kind of bad for Hartman because he was just doing his job as a drill instructor and surely didn't understand that somebody could snap to that degree under the pressure of basic training. Despite Hartman being an asshole and being somewhat of an antagonist, there is a human quality to him. I don't think Hartman wanted Pyle to snap. I don't think Hartman wanted Pyle to blow his brains out or kill him. He was just doing his job, and he just wanted to make Private Pyle the best soldier he could possibly make. And this leads us as to really the only issue I have with the boot camp portion is that Joker kind of takes a back seat, and sure, he narrates, and sure, he's featured, but at this point of the movie, it's all Private Pyle and Sergeant Hartman. Like, that's what most of my review has been talking about, is these two characters. And I think because of this, it makes the transition to the Vietnam War portion of this movie kind of jarring, because it's solely following him. Because both Hartman and Private Pyle are dead, it's almost like a reset. Essentially, the boot camp segment hit like a level 10 pretty quick and maintained that 10 throughout the entire run of the segment, and then for its second half, it hits the reset and just never really is able to get to that same level as the boot camp segment. Essentially, it was too tough of an act to follow, and sometimes people just kind of drop off when the first act is that strong. But honestly, I really do like the Vietnam War segment of this movie for a few reasons. Stanley Kubrick has said that he did not set out to make an anti-war film. He set out to make a film that shows war for what it is. Despite being a movie set in the Vietnam War portion of the movie is more character-driven and character-focused, and it's more focused on the effects of the war itself than the actual fighting. For example, the opening of the Vietnam War segment is one of the more memorable parts of the Vietnam War segment, where Joker and his photographer Rafterman are met by a Vietnamese prostitute.
He's so horny. Me so horny. You keep lying. Me love you long time.
That "me so horny" thing has been sampled in so many songs over the years, it's ridiculous. And during the course of my research, I learned that not only was that actress not Vietnamese, she wasn't even really from Asia, she was British born and Chinese, and you can hear the British accent kind of slip in, but it works. Because she's portraying somebody who doesn't really speak English and likely would have picked up their English-speaking accent from other English speakers that she's encountered. So as we learned in the first half, Joker is a Vietnam War correspondent, or a journalist, if you will. Like, going back to that boot camp half, I do like when Sergeant Hartman finds out that Joker's there for journalism.
Military journalism. You gotta be shitting me, Joker. You think you're Mickey Spillane? You think you're some kind of fucking writer?
Sir, I wrote for my high school newspaper, sir.
Jesus H. Christ, you're not a writer. You're a killer!
A killer, yes, sir!
He's almost like disappointed and pissed off, but still remains encouraging despite this. Working for Stars and Stripes magazine means that Joker is basically there to write propaganda, and while it's propaganda somewhat rooted in the truth, his editor, the lieutenant, is telling him to fluff up this one piece of news because there was no confirmed kill. And it does speak on how unpopular the Vietnam War was among Americans, because yeah, it was a pointless war, and they weren't doing very well at this point. They don't really give a solid timeline of events, like we don't know exactly when the boot camp portion takes place, and how much time between the boot camp portion and the Vietnam portion there is, but considering it does depict the Tet Offensive, we can assume it takes place in 1968 when the Tet Offensive happened. I think the use of the Tet Offensive as a narrative device is kind of a good example to show how fucking serious the war was and how the Vietnamese weren't fucking around. But yeah, the action sequence depicting the Tet Offensive is short, but it's sweet and it's pretty good at establishing the overall environment of the war. While the base that Joker was at didn't get hit very hard, it's said that all these other military bases in Vietnam got hit pretty fucking hard during the Tet Offensive. I do like how Joker lives up to his name, like, it's a super serious situation and all he has to say is,
"It's a huge shit sandwich and we're all gonna have to take a bite."
Sir, does this mean that Aunt Margaret's not coming?
And unfortunately, his wisecracking gets on his lieutenant's nerves, and him and his photographer Rafterman find themselves sent to Phu Bai. Another one of the defining scenes of the Vietnam portion of Full Metal Jacket just has to be the chopper gunner. Like, this guy's fucking crazy. And this shit was like common over there. I guess they didn't really like handing out Section 8s in Vietnam because nobody wanted to fucking volunteer for the war because it was bullshit. But yeah, you have a guy just like laughing maniacally as he guns down civilians, and this was all too common during that war.
Ha ha! Anyone who runs is a VC. Anyone who stands still is a well-disciplined VC.
Say what you will about Canada, but at least when we commit war crimes, they're funny. I do like that he's reunited with Cowboy. I guess the implication here is that quite a bit of time has passed between the boot camp segment and this segment, and, you know, the wisecracks come out, they're being guys, they're joking around with each other. But then we're introduced to Cowboy's unit, and we really get to see the effect that the war had on people, because these guys are fucking nuts. Adam Baldwin plays Animal Mother, who almost seems like your typical action hero type guy, but like I said, since this isn't like an action movie, his character isn't quite effective. Another fun fact when it comes to casting is that Stanley Kubrick wanted Arnold Schwarzenegger to play Animal Mother, but unfortunately Schwarzenegger was committed to do The Running Man at this point. I think that would have been really interesting to see Arnold in like a serious war movie playing a somewhat serious character. Like, how the fuck would they have pulled that off? I feel I should note that the Vietnam War portion of this movie is not really a linear plot. It's more a few vignettes that happen to take place during the war, and some of these scenes are really good, but there is a little bit of a drag factor here. It's definitely serviceable, but I'm starting to see more and more why people gravitate more towards the first half of the movie and kinda just don't like this half. Not that I don't like it, I still like it. I just find it has a lot less substance than the first half. Like, the interviews are pretty cool. I like this format, I like how Kubrick shot it. But I find it lacks the kind of excitement that one would expect from a war movie, but I understand the reasoning behind it, because like I said, it's trying to show war how it is, and war isn't always triumphant and heroic. All the action sequences here start and finish pretty quickly and usually don't end well. I do genuinely think the climax, though, is on par with the boot camp portion. The climax depicts the unit going into a bombed out city. This is occurring in North Vietnam, so it's nice. And obviously, you know, this was shot in the UK, so this is all just like a bombed out part of England from like World War II, kind of dressed up to look like Vietnam. And this is not like a glorious action scene. Basically what happens is the commanding officer gets taken out by a booby trap, and then Cowboy, who is not fit to lead the squad, ends up leading the squad. And when he sends 8-Ball out, he gets picked off by a sniper. And I always felt bad for 8-Ball because he's like kind of a funny character. Like earlier on when he whips his dick out at the prostitute.
What we have here, little yellow sister, is a magnificent specimen of pure Alabama black snake. But ain't too goddamn buku.
Okay.
That was some good shit. But the way Kubrick shot this, because like in a time of war, a sniper doesn't always just kill his target. A sniper will wound the target in an attempt to lure other targets out to save him, so that the sniper can also just take them out. It's a classic wartime tactic. Wound one man, kill several. It also shows just how deadly a fucking sniper is during a time of war. Like, they have no idea where this sniper is. They're fucking firing all over everything. They're not hitting anything. They weren't even shooting at the general area where the sniper was. This sequence really displays how brilliant Stanley Kubrick was when it came to like how his movies looked. The way the film just goes like dead silent as the camera zooms in on the person who's about to get shot. I really like how this whole sequence looks and feels. Like, this shit almost feels like a fucking horror movie with how they do this whole sequence. Just dead silent, and all you can hear is like the sounds of gunfire and explosions just faintly in the distance. Like, this is a masterclass in filmmaking right here. This is just a depiction of full-on panic from the American soldiers. And by the time they do figure out where the sniper is, Cowboy's dead. And the big kicker of all of this is they storm the area where the sniper is, and it's just like some poor teenage girl who's like fighting for her country. I do like that during the Vietnam War portion, all that the journalists and Joker can talk about is getting their confirmed kill. They like really just want to get one confirmed kill so they can say they did it because they were at like a war. And they talk about the 1,000-yard stare that someone gets when they've killed someone in combat. And then at the end, with the sniper mortally wounded and like begging to be put out of her misery, Joker does get his confirmed kill, but there's no real glory to be had putting a fucking bullet in the head of a wounded teenage girl. It's basically just euthanasia at that point, and you can tell he really doesn't want to do it. He can't bring himself to do it, but fuck it, he may as well just do it. It's the right thing to do at this point. Which kind of just reminds me that for some reason, like, mercy killing in a time of war is like a violation of whatever rules they have, and I don't really understand that. I remember some guy got like court-martialed in the Canadian military because he found some Taliban guy with like a hole the size of a basketball in his chest and his face blown off, like still breathing. To whoever reported that guy to his superior officer, you're a fucking narc. So it ends up being a pretty anticlimactic movie, but it works because there's no real climax with war, especially the Vietnam War. The battle scenes aren't glorious in action film. The battle scenes are anticlimactic, they're quick, and usually result in a lot of deaths on both sides. And the ending of this movie is just like straight up nihilistic, but there is some air of optimism to it. With Joker explaining that he is in fact in a world of shit, but he's happy to be alive as the soldiers sing the Mickey Mouse Club theme.
Boys and girls from far and near, you're welcome as can be. M-I-C-K-E-Y. M-O-U-S-E.
The thing about Full Metal Jacket is it's a Kubrick film, so naturally a lot of people are gonna say that it's like this great movie. And it is, like Stanley Kubrick was a very talented filmmaker. But I find anytime I bring this movie up, it's just people really talking on the boot camp portion and nobody really has anything to say about the Vietnam War portion. Like, do people not like the sniper bit? Do people not like the prostitute? Do you not like the depiction of the war not being like a glorification of it? I've just always found it very interesting that despite containing some very memorable film moments that nobody really talks about this part of the movie. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that Vincent D'Onofrio and Arlie Ermey are the powerhouse performances of this movie. Like, D'Onofrio went on to do a bunch of fucking movies, Arlie Ermey went on to do a bunch of fucking movies, Matthew Modine went on to do Cutthroat Island. But honestly, I've sung the praises of D'Onofrio and Ermey a lot throughout this review, but I do want to say I like Matthew Modine. He's such a wisecracking asshole in this movie, and typically that's not the kind of person you want to be in the military, but it works for him. His duality of man thing is probably one of the best scenes in war movie history.
You write born to kill on your helmet and you wear a peace button. What's that supposed to be, some kind of sick joke?
No, sir. I think I was trying to suggest something about the duality of man, sir.
I think the problem is, though, that Private Joker is not really a strong enough character to carry this film when you've had two great characters just go off in the first half. And his supporting cast in the Vietnam War portion of the movie is not nearly as good as the boot camp portion. Cowboy really doesn't do anything. Animal Mother is just like a lamer version of the Chopper Gunner character, and he doesn't have a lot to really play off of. And I understand they're trying to portray kind of like an of water dynamic with Joker, what with him being a journalist and not having been in the field before, but they kind of have a bit of discord when he first gets to the unit, and then like after that it really just doesn't play into the movie that much anymore, so I really think it just didn't work as much as Kubrick wanted it to. Because yeah, he's the POV character, so we're getting dropped into the shit with him for the first time, and that aspect works, but they really could have had more internal conflict between him and the other soldiers. But I get that if they would have done that, it probably would have crowded up the whole second and third act of the movie, so whatever, it works. It just kind of makes it a little bit less engaging than the boot camp portion because they had two solid characters, and then Joker kind of being the POV character for that as well. This is kind of made up for with the whole tense situation of the sniper scene, but like I said, that's the climax of the movie, so you got like a big chunk between the boot camp segment and the sniper part that it has ups and downs. It's not bad. I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's like of a low quality or anything, it's kind of less engaging. And I think some people just typically can't handle it being less engaging and therefore gravitate more towards the boot camp segment. But nevertheless, Full Metal Jacket is like in that top 5 Vietnam War movies of all time. Like, I see a lot of people talking about Platoon, Apocalypse Now. I personally think it's the best Vietnam War movie ever made. And I think because it's a total subversion of what we look at as a war movie. No big action sequences, no real comedic comedic moments that don't have a darker payoff, and it doesn't even really have like a big bombastic score behind it. It has kind of a droning score for certain scenes, but there's a lot of scenes that are shown with no score whatsoever, and it's much to the benefit of the feeling of this movie. I'm a pretty negative person, so I like the fact that they're depicting it as not really a triumphant war. There are no moments of triumph. The one moment of triumph that could be argued is Joker getting his confirmed kill, and it's so unsatisfying and sad that it's just like, yep, that's the reality of war. This movie truly does depict war for what it is. It's not glorious, it's not triumphant, it's awful, and half the time doesn't even need to happen. In lieu of a score, the movie actually does make use of a lot of period-appropriate licensed music. Both halves of the movie use some period-appropriate licensed music. I like the opening with everybody's head getting shaved with that song playing. I think the use of Surfin' Bird is, at the time it was probably very good, but considering now I just associate this with that Family Guy episode, it kind of takes me out. But if you forget that Family Guy episode existed and remember that that song was actually a huge hit during this point in time, it does work. And it obviously would not be a Vietnam War movie if Painted Black didn't play at some point. I think it's sad that Stanley Kubrick really didn't do much after this. He did Eyes Wide Shut and then he died. I kind of wish he lived a little bit longer because there's a certain style that he has that makes most of his films, even if they come off as unappealing, somehow appealing. But what is my final verdict when it comes to the duality of Full Metal Jacket? Do I think the Vietnam War segment is on par with the boot camp segment? Yes and no. I think narrative-wise the boot camp segment is superior because the boot camp segment has an A to B plot. The Vietnam War segment is nothing but a vignette of various events that happened during the Tet Offensive. However, production-wise, I do think the Vietnam War segment is a very good-looking segment. I think it's well plotted, and the overall message of depicting war for how it is much more present during the Vietnam War segment. And that mostly has to do with the fact that this segment takes place during the war itself. Boot camp segment is undoubtedly the better part of the movie, but the Vietnam War portion of the movie deserves its flowers. I think if you're somebody who watched this movie and didn't think much of the Vietnam War portion of the movie, you should probably give it another go and maybe go in without expecting it to be this grand war movie. Appreciate it for what it is. And that is a complete and total subversion of what most of the other war movies at the time were doing. Just follow the characters, follow the dialogue, and the themes. Because that's what really drives it, not the war portion itself, but the depiction of the realistic effect that the war has on people. This movie doesn't depict the Americans as the good guys. It doesn't quite depict the Vietnamese as the bad guys either. They're both kind of just in the middle here. Because yeah, the NVA does waste a bunch of their own civilians, but also the American military is shown partying with a dead soldier, and the chopper gunner is full on blasting civilians. All of this was just a part of the reality of that war, and thank God it's over. So that was me talking about Full Metal Jacket, my first big movie review since I took my break. I kind of went improv on a lot of it. I wanted to see how I did just not working with a script, so if I do kind of come off as a bit daft in some bits, it's because I'm literally just talking out of my ass. What are your thoughts on Full Metal Jacket? Is it your favorite Vietnam War movie? Let me know in the comments. And like, subscribe, and share this video around with your friends, or you will be in a world of shit.
I am in a world of shit.